Hey, what's up, Can't Believers and high performers? Welcome to another episode of the Can't Believe I Made It podcast. It's your boy, Des. In today's episode, I have my really phenomenal friend, Ben Mendelson, on. And what really sparked interest in me reaching out and really wanted to tell his story is that when you step into this game of athleticism, in this game of performance, and even if we look at people in the professional ranks, just like Ben Mendelson here, you might think to yourself that that might be a absolute dream job. And in some ways, having experienced that, it absolutely is, but the hours are grueling. I oftentimes joke, and maybe some of my colleagues and friends who are still in this might not think this is funny, but it is really hard to have a successful relationship, marriage, or even merely just a successful relationship with your children and family members and friends when you are in the thick of a season. Big shout out to those people because most of those people are likely working anywhere from about 80 hours a week, not sleeping as well. It's high performance at its best, and there's a lot of pressure. And so, big shout out to all those people. But I oftentimes tell people that it's really hard to navigate some of the things that you believe in and love most when you are constantly doing this one thing. And when we look at professional sports, it's really great to wear that logo. It feels really good, and at the same time, it comes with its. I mean, just like anything else, right? It comes with its evils. And so, if you would have told me a couple years ago when I met Ben that he would have left professional baseball with his childhood team, which I thought was like a dream opportunity here for him, for yet another dream opportunity to really look into the science and the performance aspects of what goes on with our firefighters. I'm sure we've all heard the statistic in the past is that most firefighters' deaths are due to cardiac arrest. And so I asked the really deep questions, the scientific questions about, hey, what can we glean from this constant state of fight or flight, which a lot of these firefighters and other emergency type people are engaged in? By the way, big shout out to you all for saving the world. I have nothing but respect for you all. And I kind of dove into a recent story that myself and my family had just witnessed from the standpoint of being still in your body and leading with that next best step for yourself. But we dove into the science of what's happening with our firefighters, and we dove into some of the life changes that Ben is currently going through. At the time, we didn't really discuss his newest venture in marrying his best friend and now wife, Savannah. The two of you have had obviously fantastic roots in the Can't Believe I Made It podcast. So, biggest of congrats to you both for recently just getting married. So there's a lot of things on the table today that I'm really excited about. And I think what it points it back to is one, once again, inside of this season, it is okay to pivot. And two, what can we glean from our firefighters and our servicemen and women who are constantly acting at that state of fight or flight? What can we learn about tapping back into the body, tapping back into the moment to help us increase our mental performance, our life performance, how we perform in our relationships, how we perform in our work, and really just like I said, how we perform in life. I am so thankful to you, Ben, if you listen to this, for hopping on, brother. It's going to be a good one. And I think you can probably sense too, and I said this in the pod, I don't like serious Ben. If you know anything about Ben, you know that he talks so much shit and he is so sarcastic. But in today's episode, he was on his best behavior, which I think in some ways makes me really uncomfortable because it's not who he is. So if there's any discomfort on mine, it's because Ben did this to me. Anywho, I hope you enjoy the episode. Let's get it. All right, ladies and gents, I'm excited for this one. I have one of my best friends and former colleagues, if you will, on the pod today, Benjamin Mendelson. Welcome, buddy.
Morning, Des. Thanks for having me on, man. I know we've been trying to get this going for a while. I'm glad we finally did.
You know, it's funny because you and I have had different versions of this podcast in just conversation.
Hey,
And oftentimes it's a lot of laughter. And we kind of premise this with, and so for those that don't know, there's two sides of Benjamin Mendelson that I well, one side rather that I really love, and the other side that I don't. It's his professional side, and having shared this space with him from a professional point of view, and we'll get into that in a little bit. When he's serious, I can't do it. So Ben, which version am I going to get of you today?
Does he? I, like many people, contain multitudes, so you're not going to know what you get till the answer comes out.
Oh, I love it. Well, Ben, I'm super excited for this for a couple of reasons. One, just like you said, I think we've had different versions of this chat for quite some time, and we've been trying to get this on the calendar. So obviously, there's one aspect that I'm super excited about. But I think the other thing, Ben, that I am really looking forward to, and we kind of talked about this off air, where season 8 and having the guest on and hearing their stories of pivoting has been really cool. And I think with yours, it'd be a really fantastic opportunity to talk about the process of where you've gotten to, because when I think of like hometown grown kids, you're definitely one of those people growing up in Wisconsin. And when we think about our lives as children, like most of them, at least for me, I don't know about you, but I grew up wanting to be a professional athlete. And that was something that I wanted to do since day one. And when I was thinking about like, hey, how do we want to tell Ben's story? I thought one of the cool things that would be cool to start with is talking about your upbringing and what got you into professional sports, and then obviously describing the pivot. So going back to, little Ben, if you could like just tell your story.
Sure, little curly-haired Ben, back when I still had hair. Um, so my sister and I, we both grew up. We kind of moved around a little bit as kids, because just my dad's work was always changing around until we were maybe until we were about 6, 7, 8. My sister's 1 year older than me. Um, so it for the first, you know, 5, 6 years of our lives, we were moving around the Midwest a little bit just because of our dad's work. So we lived in a couple different places, but Milwaukee is really where we ended up landing, and we stayed here for most of our childhood, and then we went to grade school, high school, everything. But we both had really active childhoods. We were always doing stuff. I think like other '90s kids, you just we lived in a small
The
neighborhood
90s.
where you're always riding bikes around, and your friends down the block or a couple of streets over, and you just ride your bike over there. The bike's piled up on the lawn. That's where where the party is.
Yep.
um, and we were always playing sports. I mean, I don't really know if there's any sport I didn't try as a kid, which was a credit to definitely a credit to our parents. They wanted us to be active, and they wanted us to try new things. So my sister and I we were actually really avid swimmers as kids. We were on swim team in a couple different places as like youths, and that was like we swam more than I think anything else. Our dad was a swimmer; he was a competitive swimmer, and he swam until college, and then he stopped competitively swimming when he was in college, and he himself made a couple of career pivots. But that sort of athletic mindset was something that both our parents wanted us to have, whether it was just a way to get us out of the house or if it was a way to actually keep us healthy and active and engaged. But I think just having that mindset of always being active and playing sports kind of started the mindset for me of just loving being around the environment.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think I really understood the value of being in team sports until I got to high school, because I started playing football. I think I started playing football in 7th grade, and it was fun, but I really had no idea what I was doing, and it was like a good time, and I wanted to keep doing it, but I didn't quite grasp everything. But when I started in high school, our high school seniors and the captains, I thought had they were pretty good leaders, and it got me more engaged in what it is like to be in team sports and what it is like to have that kind of group of people that is, you almost treat as a second family
Yeah.
when you're on that team. And when I was in growing up, I played baseball, loved baseball. And then I switched to play football and lacrosse when I was in high school. And again, lacrosse was a sport I knew nothing about when I started playing, but we had, a ton of open spots on that team. So it was a way that I knew I was going to actually play a sport. Whereas baseball,
Yeah.
I was not a super great baseball player. Um, and so I made that little switch, and it was something that I really loved, and I love that sport and the history of that game. And it's really, um, it's something that I always pay attention to when college lacrosse season comes around because it's such a fun game to watch. Um, and yeah, I think there's so many aspects of my childhood growing up that probably defined things that I still do today that
Yeah.
you can't quite pinpoint, but I know
Yeah.
that just being active as a kid was such a huge part of our lifestyle, and it was something that we always, still to this day, just keep carrying with us.
So, Ben, I think, I mean, my recollection of conversations that we've had that kind of helped you to stumble into professional sports, I can imagine had a lot to do with, keeping active. Because I think, if I remember correctly, you played college football, right?
Yeah, I was on the team.
I was
We'll say
like,
that. I was again. I was not. I was never a spectacular athlete
yeah,
when it came to playing football, but I was very fortunate enough to uh, have an opportunity to play at Ithaca College, a small school in upstate New York,
yeah,
and D3 football. And um, my freshman and sophomore year were it was I've never experienced, I think, a bigger gap in where I was coming in with my skill set and
yeah,
what was actually required to be good at that level.
yeah,
Because I went to a very small high school here. We played a very simple style of football, and then we actually went to a college where it was somebody's entire full time job to be a football coach.
yeah.
And so it was totally different, and it just took me completely by surprise. And I tried my best to keep up with it, but it definitely was a bit over my head. But it actually worked out for the better because after I was done playing after my sophomore year, the coaching staff asked me if I would stay on as a part of the team in a coaching capacity
Yeah.
because they knew that I was in exercise science as a major. And so they wanted to offer an opportunity for me to get some kind of volunteer hours, being with the team in the weight room, seeing that aspect of it, but also learning how to coach. And so one of my good friends and I, we stayed on the staff as sort of student assistant coaches, and we worked with the like freshman linebackers and defensive line, and we had a really good time. And for me, it just taught me so much about public speaking skills that I still
Yeah.
carry to this day.
Yeah.
But it just taught me so much about learning how to build rapport with younger athletes, sort of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. But it was kind of a unique experience where I was also coaching uh, coaching players that were also my roommates,
Yeah.
and they're we're the same age, we've had similar experiences, and I have to sort of start dividing between who's fun Ben and who's professional Ben.
Oh, that was the start. That was the start, Ben. I hate it. I actually didn't know that. So, Ben, like obviously you're, I guess I would say a homegrown talent, right? So when you got into baseball, just in general, I mean, what was that process like for you? And how, I don't know, like, was it exciting being a kid from Wisconsin, also joining the Milwaukee Brewers? I mean, what was that process like for you?
Yeah, it was super exciting. So after I was done with my undergrad, I basically went right into my master's program at University of Wisconsin Milwaukee, and my master's was actually in focusing primarily in sports psych. And I at the time didn't know if I wanted to go into sports psychology and work completely in that field, or if I wanted to stay in strength and conditioning. I was kind of leaning more towards staying in strength and conditioning, but using the sports psychology knowledge as a way to better my skill set. and just have better conversational skills and um, to understand athletes a little bit on a different level,
Yeah.
which I think is what happened, and I think that's something that I will never take for granted is the skills learned during that program.
Yeah. Yeah.
But after my first year, or during my first year of that program, one of the professors at UW Milwaukee, who was my exercise physiology professor and is currently now my advisor in my doctoral program, he had been sent a job posting for a strength and conditioning internship with the Brewers that was going to cover their summer league rookie team in AZ. And that was he sent it to me. I applied for it. It was something that I never thought was going to actually work, because it's like, this is a professional
Yeah. Yeah.
sports team. I'm currently just some schmuck personal trainer in southeastern Wisconsin. Like, this
Yeah.
is sure this
This would be
this will
dope,
be a
but
good
there's no
experience.
way. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be a great experience to interview. And I interviewed with the then coordinator, whose name was Jeff Mester, and we had a great conversation. And I interviewed with him while I was actually driving. I was going from Milwaukee to Louisville, Kentucky for the National Strength and Conditioning Association's coaches conference in
Hmm.
2015. So I interviewed with him basically while I was in the car, and driving through a snowstorm in Indiana.
Oh God.
And yeah, it was a little hectic, but
The
we had a great
Midwest is wild,
conversation.
dude.
There's a lot of stuff going on over here. But I interviewed with him. We had a great conversation, and then I found out a couple weeks later that I actually was offered the position, and it was just wild. I had
Like
never.
childhood dream accomplished,
Yeah,
right?
I we we had season tickets to County Stadium, which was the stadium before Miller Park, which is now AmFam Field. So we saw the Brewers games all the time
Yeah.
growing up. Like, we were big Brewers fans, and so for me, it was like, this is unbelievable. Like, it just could not get better than this.
Yeah.
And when I got down to the complex and started working, it was again just sort of a total whirlwind of learning what's going on, learning the schedule, the system, meeting everybody, because there's such a large staff and there's so many players. And
Yeah.
also, at the time, I did not speak a lick of Spanish, um, which is a slightly important skill set when you work in baseball. And so it was. I just remember if you remember in the old complex,
Oh, I
there
remember.
was, yeah. So there was a wall, like that. I think it was like the north wall of the weight room, where there was the two TVs, and right next to the TVs there was a big banner, and the banner said, it said something like "Your Path to the Big Leagues," and it had a logo of all the minor
Hmm.
league affiliates. And I
Oh
just
yeah.
remember I'd look at that banner every day as I was walking from the locker room to the office, and I was just like, look up at that banner. And I was like, man, like, this is where it starts. This is incredible.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I was down in Arizona for about 3 months for that first internship, and then I had to go back and finish my master's program. And then during the master's that second year of my master's program, I that window of working in baseball had now been opened, and it was something that I was like, well, this is something I could definitely do once I'm done with my program, and it's something that I would want to do. And I found the resources of the Pro Baseball Strength and Conditioning Coaches Society website and all the job postings. And I mean, I sent resumes to as many teams as had postings on there, and I ended up interviewing with a couple of teams. But very fortunately enough, I got a call from the Brewers a few months after I left that there was an opening for their low A team in Appleton, Wisconsin, and it ended up working in my favor, and it was history from there on out.
I was I always get excited because I remember when I first got the call to join the baseball club as well. It was like my very first professional sports job, and I remember getting really excited because I think I had said this to you. Also, for those that don't know, Ben here actually interviewed me, and I think I might have said this during the interview, but I was like, "Listen, I as a kid, I wanted to be a three sport professional athlete. But as I got older, I realized that I'm 5'6", about 175, probably not going to go pro in a lot of things. So like this is my version of pro. So I remember Ben thinking back on that day and just like how excited I was to even just wear the logo. You mentioned something earlier that I'm wondering if we can dive into a little bit, like the sports psych thing, because for me as someone who observes behaviors, it was really interesting in a lot of ways just to see not only the baseball culture, but also to see the culture of professional athletes and really teasing out some of the like habits and rituals that I'm seeing and some of the mindset shifts and things like that. And it was really cool observing you coaching through that process. So kind of like going back to the sports psych thing, like what are some of the things that you were able to glean in working with athletes? Like how did you use that?
I would say the one of the biggest things that I maybe didn't think of initially was going to be very important, but became really important was when I was working with the team in um, both the teams in the AZL team and in Appleton with the Timber Rattlers. When when you're in the minor league season, there's so many player moves that happen, and so players could show up almost randomly.
Yeah.
Certainly certain times, you might get a heads up a week ahead of time. Hey, we just drafted this guy. He's going to throw two starts in Arizona. Then he's coming up to Appleton. You might get a heads up like that. But sometimes you may know within 48 hours or maybe within 24 hours that somebody is joining your team. And the thing you have to remember is anytime somebody joins or leaves the group, you have to restart that cycle of reforming the group.
Yeah.
Um, so
That's a good point. Yeah.
roles become redefined. There has to be some, there's a storming process. There's maybe some level of conflict, but then you have to then get back to normal business. And so if you think about how many player moves might happen in a season, that process might happen several dozen times.
Yeah.
And understanding that when that happens, somebody who doesn't necessarily know, like let's say a player doesn't necessarily acknowledge that they're going through that process because the whole team is going through that process, you kind of have a better appreciation from the outside that when you see maybe some behavior from them that might be a little bit different than what you've seen the last couple of weeks, but you then realize we just got a new pitcher and they're now fighting for innings coming out of the bullpen. You start to realize new things that you may not have recognized before. So it wasn't something I considered immediately, but that was something I always kept in mind
Yeah.
because it starts to tell a different story of why somebody might, have certain rituals or why they may change their behaviors. And again, it's not necessarily always in a bad way. It's not necessarily that you always see somebody change their behaviors and you're just like, oh my goodness, what's going on with this guy? You just, you notice slightly different things. If somebody is normally a very early person to the ballpark, maybe they start showing up a little bit later than they normally do,
Hmm.
or vice versa. Maybe they start showing up a little earlier than they normally do because they want to do extra work. They want to do more stuff. And
Yeah.
so you just kind of work with whatever happens. Again, it's not necessarily that everybody is always taken aback and everybody starts to take a step backwards when things like that happen. Your job as the coach is to anticipate some of those things and just help people get through that process so we can all get back to reforming the group so that we can put our best performance out on the field. And that sort of
So
lets
right.
you kind of, I don't want to say necessarily soften the blow, but it just lets you kind of get ahead of some things. And I think it helps build better relationships because you can empathize better. You
Yeah.
have an idea that things have changed within the group, so your level of empathy can be a bit more proactive.
Ben, I love that too because it kind of gives us a nice bridge into one of the things that I really wanted to just like talk about and discuss some of the observations that I saw when you were working with athletes. And one of the things I thought was really special, having worked with strength coaches before and those that were part of medical teams, I really didn't see a whole lot of talk and maybe there might have been some here and there, but actual talk and action pertaining to mindfulness. And that was something, Ben, that I used to observe with you. And I don't know if that was a learned skill set that you had learned from other mentors, but there were a lot of moments that I observed you working with athletes from the standpoint of mindfulness. And so for you, as you're kind of looking at it, why do people need to be exploring their relationship with mindfulness as it pertains to their performance? This can be athletic performance, this can be performance in life, work, whatever that is. Why was it something that you were teaching these professional athletes?
I'll say that some of it, I a lot of it, I definitely learned from my advisor during my master's program, who's Dr. Barbara Meyer, and she's just absolutely brilliant.
Hmm.
Um, and so mindfulness was at the time that I was doing my master's program was a very hot
Yeah,
topic
yeah,
in sports psychology, and it's something that has been, I think to this day, it's been potentially a little over commercialized. Um, but the message still stays the same, and the message is still very important. You see a lot of different books about mindfulness, and there's a lot of different things out there to help people become more mindful. I think the way that I approached it was from my perspective as a coach. There's a level of there's a level of expectation that I have for myself to be a good steward
yeah,
for helping people, in this particular instance, athletes who are in a place that I have been, being not necessarily in professional sports as an athlete, but I've been 19 to 22 years old. I've been in a place where I'm still figuring out what I want to do. I remember changing my major in college. And I remember that being in that time period comes with a lot of different emotions and a lot of different growing up experiences. And half the team is people that are uh, Latin American from the United States, and that's a completely different experience. So if I didn't take the time to become mindful of why somebody else's experiences um, may actually impact how they perform in a strength and conditioning context,
hmm,
then I'm not necessarily doing the job to the best of my abilities. And so it grew into something. I think by the time that you and I started working together, I had already been learning some of those things for about 3 years. And so it was something that developed over time to just have a slightly different approach, and understand that the core part of the core part of strength and conditioning that has to be achieved first is the rapport building and the relationship building, which was definitely something I learned
100%.
from the
Yeah.
sports psych component. Instead of strength and conditioning in some contexts is very much, this is the program, this is what we're going to do, just do it. And that can certainly help, and that can certainly be simple and a great way to get a lot of things accomplished. But I didn't find personally that that was the best approach for me.
No, I love that because I think one of the biggest messages, Ben, that I'm getting in this conversation, and then, the other thousands of conversations that we've had just about like human performance is when working with athletes, it's so important to connect with them on a human level. And it sounds super cliche and 101. So for listeners out there, if you're like, yeah, Desi, that makes total sense. It's just not something that is always talked about. And I felt like what was really special for the friends that I made, inside of the medical team is everyone was really on the same page with we have to understand who the person is before we can even start catering to their performance. And I really love that because it is very, um, I mean, it's an analogy to life of understanding people and really creating empathy inside of those relationships. Because Ben, as I look at it, obviously you're a homegrown kid. This is a dream job for you. I would have thought that you would have stayed in professional sports for the rest of your career, but you decided to pivot. So I don't know if I've ever asked you this question. So I'm glad that we're on air to ask this, but you're doing something different now. I would have thought that you would have been in professional sports your whole career. What caused you to think about other opportunities? What caused the pivot?
It was There was a number of factors, but the most important thing was really just that I had a lot of other questions. It
Hmm.
was it was more, you know, I think when I left my master's program, I had an idea that maybe I would return and go back to school for a PhD at some point, because I didn't become interested in doing research until my master's program, because in my undergrad we weren't exposed to a lot of hands-on research. During my master's program, UWM is an R1 university, and so there's a lot of research that happens, and the way that the lab functions that I was in is really, really heavy on making sure we're always forward thinking and always thinking about what is going to be coming next and how we can continue to push out really kind of game changing research that's going to be very applicable and help the practitioners. Um, and so it was something that really piqued my interest, but it wasn't at the time something that I wanted to dive into. I wanted to get out there and work and see what was out there. And I also had the opportunity to work with the Brewers, which, you know, you're right. Like it was definitely a dream come
Yeah.
true, to work with them for the, 6 years plus the internship that I did. And it was awesome. And, but I think the, after the last year that I was there, or during the last year that I was there, was something that I had sort of mulled over for a couple of years, that I wanted to think about going back to school. And I started to dive a little bit more into what was happening in the tactical space.
Hmm.
Tactical strength and conditioning is something that's really, really grown in popularity,
Yeah.
and
It's
there's a
such an
lot of different
interesting
job
field
opportunities out
right now.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's something that's, and I think at the time that I was in baseball, that was when, again, a lot of people were reading Jocko Willink's books.
Hmm.
One of Mark Devine had
Yeah.
put out books, and his podcast was doing really well. So there was a lot of this injection of the tactical mindset into strength and conditioning, and actually kind of coming from a leadership and or mindfulness space. And it was something that, as I continued to learn more and continued to think about, I continued to communicate with my now advisor, Dr. Kyle Ebersol at University of Wisconsin Milwaukee, and he has had a long-standing relationship with the Milwaukee Fire Department, and the lab just has put out so many cool papers about what physiologically it's like to be a firefighter.
Hmm.
And it's something that just really became a huge interest for me. Um, and at the time, I was starting to build a lot of questions about the physiology behind the near maximal intensity exercise, which was something that I saw in baseball, because we would see that minor league pitchers. There's a couple of papers out there about minor league pitchers wearing heart rate monitors in game, and you'd see these really intense high heart rate responses to pitching. So it was this snowball effect of seeing how can people work at such a high intensity
Yeah.
repeatedly? How can they keep doing that? And the term work capacity was always getting thrown around, and it's still a hot topic in strength and conditioning. And I just really wanted to know more about it. And the best way for me to do that was to pursue a PhD program, and really set out the time to pursue this research agenda. And that's how it shook out. And it became a great opportunity to come back home, work at
Yeah.
UW Milwaukee with professors that I knew very well, and I knew what I was getting into with the lab. And I personally was much more ready for graduate school this time than in my master's program. Master's
Yeah.
program, I just kind of did it because, like, I applied for it because it seemed like something that people who were successful strength and conditioning coaches did. Was they went on to pursue a master's degree. And it was something that I was fortunate enough to get the opportunity to work with Dr. Meyer. But my expectations for myself weren't necessarily matching with what I actually, again, my skill set wasn't necessarily matching with the demand of what I was going to have to do.
Yeah.
So my master's program was a big learning curve for me of what graduate school is like. And by the time I was done, I was starting to get it a little bit more, but then I started working. And so having some more time to think about it and get ready and build these questions, it it got me more in the mindset of, I think that I would be more ready to pursue graduate school now
Hmm.
than I was before. And so far, I feel like it's been going a little bit better.
Yeah.
I feel like the process has been definitely a lot better, and it's been so many great conversations. I know Savannah can attest. I've read more research papers laying around my office than I've ever had,
Yeah.
and it's been a much more. It's been a very fulfilling
Yeah.
experience so far.
Ben, from the aspect of like human performance, again, I'm getting to ask you questions I don't think I've asked, and this is such a great avenue to go. Um, from the standpoint of human performance, can we tap into the physiological not only needs but also strain of firefighters? I've always wondered this because my knowledge of it is they go from a certain state to a heightened state of fight or flight very, very quickly, which obviously has its cascades with what's going on in the body. Um, but I would love to kind of tap in your brain here. Like, what are the physiological needs, and what is the physiological strain of what's going on with these firefighters?
Yeah, uh, so many things. As you alluded to, it is this, on the surface, a shift. A 24-hour shift is going to involve multiple calls, whether they're medical calls or they're fire calls. Um, and each call has its own level of not only external workload, so the amount of work that you need to actually accomplish to get the task done, and every you know every call that has that external workload is going to create internal workload. So your heart rate response, your oxygen consumption, blood pressure, things like that, and those vary across the different calls. So across a 24-hour shift, there's going to be these varying levels of intensity,
Hmm.
and certain houses in Milwaukee um, may get 24 to 26 calls in a shift. So you're never really at a steady state, or
Yeah,
you're never at
that's a
really a
lot.
rest state.
Yeah,
You're getting a ton of calls in an entire shift, and it's very intense for everybody. And so understanding, just like professional athletes, if that's the sort of performance aspect of it, everything that comes before and or after is on the preparation and the recovery side.
yes, yes,
And so trying to find the best way of managing that cycle across not just one shift, but multiple shifts per month, per year, per 25 to 30 year plus career is going to really help to set everybody up for a healthy retirement. And currently, uh, currently firefighters are, they're obviously at a really, really high risk for injury because of the physical nature of their job. But, 44% of the total firefighter fatalities in 2021 were due to sudden cardiac death. So it's not all
that's
people who are,
that's nuts.
falling off of second stories, or they're, being hit and having blunt trauma. It's people who are having heart attacks and having cardiovascular issues. And for for me, I think the question that you asked about what the physiology is really what I'm trying to learn more about myself.
Yeah, yeah,
We know that their heart rate response during a fire call may be at or near maximal levels, and understanding that that's going to have to continue to happen across an entire career span. I want to know more about how can people keep working at maximal level
yeah,
and
yeah,
maintain that across an entire career. And it happens in so many different avenues. Like, I'm personally focusing on firefighters with my research, but we saw it in athletes. We saw it with people at the Brewers, where it's these repetitive, really high intensity efforts over the course of an entire career, over years of performance. And some people handle it really, really well, and some people are struggling. And so that's why there's strength coaches and athletic trainers and medical staff to try and help be the stewards of proper preparation and recovery around these levels of performance.
I don't know. We saw something, Ben, the other day. We were out on our family walk in Arizona, and there was a couple fire trucks at the park, and they were playing ultimate frisbee. I think whatever that I've never played. to be honest. Uh, but they were like, just being active, doing their thing, having some fun. And we were walking by, and Callie was like, "How cool would that be if we got to see a call or something like that?" And then, literally, like 5 seconds later, you could hear it on their walkie-talkies. And so, what was interesting to me, and I don't know if this was just this particular house, a culture that was set up, or what. I might be able to ask you this question. But what was interesting to observe was no one was rushing to the trucks. Like, everyone would kind of like took their time. And as I was looking at it, I was thinking to myself, I was like, I wonder why they're not rushing. Like, obviously there's an emergency going on. And the more that I was observing, the more that I observed the firefighters like taking these deep diaphragmatic breaths. Like, they were just like calm as they were getting in. And in my brain, I'm still like, yo, why aren't you guys rushing? Like, someone needs your help right now. And Callie had just mentioned, she was like, well, I mean, it makes sense, don't you think? Like, you don't want them rushing to this call super stressed. Like, you want them calm because they're going to be making decisions and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, shit. Like, that makes total sense. So, again, I don't know if this was just a house thing, but you mentioned the preparation and the recovery piece, Ben, which I think is so special and very consistent with what we're seeing in just human performance. Are there things that you're finding in your research that firefighters should be doing in order to perform at a high level because their physiological needs are so, like, I guess, scattered? I mean, what are you finding?
Well, I'll say that my research agenda is still fairly new. So I wouldn't say that there's anything from my research that I would recommend
Hmm.
other than general good recommendations for healthy fit bodies. And I know the National Fire Protection Association recommends a minimum VO2 max of 42.0
I was going to ask
milliliters
you
per
about that.
kilogram
Yeah.
per
Okay.
minute. Um, and that's something that they recommend to safely perform job tasks. And there's a lot of different research out there that has examined the oxygen consumption of simulated firefighting tasks. And there's research that has examined the heart rate response of firefighters to actual emergencies.
Hmm.
So I think all of that can be guidance for firefighters to understand that you generally need to maintain a healthy level of fitness, and maintaining a high aerobic capacity is going to be important. But there's so many different factors of fitness that have been indicated to be linked to good performance, and
Hmm.
really good performance in the research has been sought at or seen as like the time to complete a task. So a shorter time to complete a task would be good performance. And because we don't want, if you're looking at data, you don't want a normal distribution of firefighting response times. Like, you want them to be shorter. Like, you want the emergencies to be resolved quickly, which that
Hmm.
would be a good thing. um, but things like general muscular strength, muscular endurance, aerobic capacity, maintaining a optimal body composition, those types of things are great components of general fitness, and they are important as well for tactical athletes, specifically the firefighters as well, because they're trying to build a good engine of of performance, so that when they do perform, it's not something that's taking all of their resources out of them,
Yeah.
because they're going to have to keep doing it. They're going to have to keep going on calls for the rest of the shift. And as you saw with those firefighters responding, whatever they heard on their radios let them know the level of response they needed to have to
Mm.
get to that emergency.
Yeah.
Because every department's going to have some expectation of your time to get to the emergency. Your time to, from when you hear the tone or you hear that there's something going on, you need to get in the engine or on the truck and get to the emergency. There's a time that you have to get there, and everything's logged. And so, even though to you it seemed like they were moving a little bit slower,
Hmm.
they've practiced and they've
Yeah.
done that so many times that them putting their PPE on is easy, and they know exactly how to throw their SCBA on and get everything hooked up, get all the hoses hooked up and turned on, and they're ready to go.
Hmm.
Um, which is an interesting thing too, because there was a paper that one of the doctoral students in our lab actually published a couple of years ago, that actually examined that if you only look at the heart rate response that firefighters have to hearing the tone. So they're in the firehouse. There's a special tone for a medical call, and there's a special tone for a fire call.
Okay.
There is actually a different heart rate response to just hearing the tone.
That
So
makes
once they
sense.
know it's a
Yeah.
when they
Yeah.
know that's a fire call, the heart rate goes a little bit higher. When they know it's a medical call, their heart rate gets elevated, but it's definitely not quite as high as when they know it's a fire call.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing. And selfishly, I'm excited to continue to have a front row seat to your process because I get to ask questions like these to my friends. um, Ben, as you're kind of looking at your trajectory right now, obviously you have a couple years. I will never call you Dr. Mendelson. I'm just never going to do it.
Then I will
um,
never respond.
but as you're kind of looking at your trajectory right now, Ben, what excites you most? Because I mean, you left professional baseball, which the the normal listener and viewer of this is going to be like, why would you do that? But obviously, you had a calling, right? And you answered that call. So for you, what excites you about what you're doing?
It's a lot of the things that excited me about working in professional sports. From a strength and conditioning background, I love knowing about what it physically takes to get work done.
Hmm.
Um, and there's so many, there's so much research out there about the physiological response to exercise. A lot of it is in steady state sports. So, long distance running, cycling, things like that. There's a lot of different avenues there. There's a lot more research that's been coming out in the last 10, 15 years in different kinds of team sports, like rugby or soccer. But what excites me is, specifically the questions that I developed and started thinking about when I was working in baseball, and just knowing there's a very wide range of fitness levels for baseball players. And baseball has traditionally been thought of as a sport that people don't need to be super fit in order to play.
Hmm.
But we generally saw that fitter people were also really good performers, um, more consistently, I'll say. I mean, there are definitely people who are great baseball players, may not have the most ideal level of fitness, but that's what you work with. And if that's the way that you manage their overall health and performance over time, then that's the way that it is. There's always going to be outliers. Um, but for me, I just can't get away from looking at things like, um, we saw super high intensity work in baseball. We saw super high intensity work in firefighting and in tactical operations. And there's something in that area of understanding what happens when human beings have to operate at near your highest sustainable level. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning, is
Yeah.
understanding, like, how can we know more about what the highest sustainable level is, and what is work capacity, what creates somebody's ability to do high intensity work over and over and over again and be fine with it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of a lot of it probably stemmed even as far back as years ago, when I started learning more about CrossFit, like everybody else, when it started being put on TV. And I had one of my college roommates was really, he worked out. He was the first person I knew who did CrossFit. And it was something that was, as a business, it was foreign to me, but obviously circuit training and calisthenics were something that we as kids did in gym class. And just that level of work was something that I wasn't necessarily totally distanced from, but seeing it all put together in a competitive standpoint, and then seeing that if you were to compare, say, an ultra marathoner versus a CrossFit athlete, both athletes have to sustain a high amount of work for a long period of time. But a CrossFit athlete is going to be doing, 1 hour chunks of really high intensity near maximal work with rest in between, but they can still do it and still perform at a super high level over the course of multiple events in a day. Where an ultra marathoner or a triathlete, they're going to be going through, 100 miles of running, or they're going to go through a full Ironman of work. It's not going to necessarily be these 1 hour chunks of super high near maximal work and then they're just resting, but they're going to find a way to get the job done. And both of those are elite level athletes in their own right.
Yeah.
And there are those people that also operate as firefighters, and there's people that operate in that capacity as baseball players, and in so many different avenues. And I just can't not keep looking at that.
I have so many more questions, Ben, and I know you have to get to work. So I want to be respectful of that. So you have to promise me that we're going to do a round two, because the question that I want to ask essentially is, if we're looking at people performing at their highest, we're also looking at some fitness metrics, right? So like, how do we take some of those gems into, for our listeners right now that are all at different areas, but also have performance needs? All right, you got to promise me we're going to do a round two of this. We'll do like a rituals for resilience episode or something. So you got to promise me. Is that okay?
Well, we'll have to circle up offline, but we'll figure it out.
Awesome. Well, Ben, I love you, buddy. I always wanted to do this. To have you on is a huge milestone of having like friends jump on this. It's super special to me, man, and I know how valuable your time is, bro. So thank you so much for taking some time. So I do want to ask you the question that I ask all of our guests. Um, Obviously, this is the Can't Believe I Made It podcast. So have you made it? And if not, what does making it look like for you in your current season of life?
I would I would say I don't think I've made it. I think the growth process is always happening and it's always continual, but it's always fun to achieve different milestones. And you kind of have those little micro feelings of, I think I made it. Like, for instance, I just published my first paper within the last month, which was really exciting. Took a long
That's
process to
dope.
do that.
Congrats, dude.
Um, Thank you. And so it was both a wow, I can't believe this finally happened, but also this is just the first one.
Yeah, this is the
We're
first
hopefully going to get a lot
iteration.
more of these. So so no, I don't necessarily think I've made it, but I'm excited to see what continues to happen. I don't know if I'll ever feel like I made it, because I just want to keep figuring out what's next.
Yeah. Yeah, man, the curiosity that you have uh just about life is really cool to see from a friend perspective. So dude, I'm super excited to continue to have, like I said, that front row seat to your process, being able to pick your brain on some really cool scientific things. So man, congratulations to where you're at, bro. I'm excited to see you
Thanks,
continue
man.
to rise, man,
Absolutely. And congrats to you, Desi.
for all the things.
All the things, man. I can't believe that you made it.
Oh, I love it. Ben, can we get access to that paper? I would love to put it in the show notes. Because typically I'll say like, hey, how can we support you? But you're not really a social media person, so that doesn't really apply. But I would love to get
That's
readers
right.
on your study.
Yeah, I will. I'll send you the link. It's on an open access journal, so it's free to access
Oh,
for everybody. You don't have to access it through a library or anything like that. So yeah, I'll send you the link.
perfect. Okay. All right. So for our listeners out there, we'll make sure we put that in the show notes. I'm going to have Ben back on because I have some burning questions about human performance that I think are super relative to what we can do to perform at our highest level from the standpoint of that preparation and recovery that Ben had talked about. So, Benjamin, thank you so much for coming back on, man. We'll have you for a round two. But yeah, appreciate you, buddy.
Absolutely. Thanks, Des.